Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about operationalization, which is perhaps the first step, what some people might call the most important step in statistical analyses. Operationalization largely refers to the process by which we start with a really rich, interesting, abstract concept and funnel down into a way to measure or observe that concept we're talking about. So generally there are really four levels for statistical analysis by which we would operationalize a concept. So at the top level, we would have what we call the abstract concept. And this would be kind of the definition or the term or language we would use to really talk about or discuss this particular idea or concept. An easy example of this might be, we might talk about abstractly the unemployment rate in the United States. And we would generally be referring to those people that are not working, sort of its most vague and most abstract sort of definition. The problem with an abstract concept is that lots of people can come up with their own definitions of that concept. So we have to move from this top level of an abstract concept down into what we would call a second level, or a defined concept. And a defined concept is us, as the researcher, defining for the audience, defining for the reader, what we are specifically referring to when we use this terminology. So once again, we're kind of thinking about unemployment. Most of us use unemployment to talk about those people who are out of work, essentially, that are not in the labor force. That's really vague. So moving down to an abstract concept, we might use the official definition or something like that to say, well, the unemployment rate or the unemployed only refer to those individuals who are of full working age, let's say those people who are 16 and older, who are actively looking for work. So in that sense, we're not talking about the people who are perhaps disabled and not working. We're not talking about the people who are retired and not working. We're not talking about the people that intentionally stay out of the workforce. We might have people that stay at home to parent or stay at home to take care of elderly relatives. Those people would technically not have jobs, but they're not actually looking for jobs. So we might not count them for an unemployment or an unemployment rate measure. So once again, abstract, kind of the vague terms we use. The defined concept would be kind of how we are thinking about measuring these folks, or who we're kind of defining to measuring these folks. And then kind of the third level then, moving down from the abstract concept, would be to come up with some kind of way to define a measure or define a measurement. How are we going to observe this phenomenon? So once again, we might start to say unemployed, those people who don't have jobs. We might define that as people who are 16 and older actively looking for work. And then we have to come up with some way to measure that. So how do I go out in the United States and figure out who is 16 and older that is actively looking for work? So where am I going to get this information from? Where are these data going to come from? So perhaps we would say then, as a observable measure, we're going to measure the unemployed as those individuals who file unemployment claims, that file joblessness claims, or perhaps those folks that are seeking benefits for not having enough income. Those would be kind of the official ways we would collect that data or that information. So once again, you have this vague concept of who's unemployed, 16 and older actively looking for work. Maybe the way we measure that or observe those people is by looking at the people that are applying for benefits or applying for unemployment benefits. Now, of course, is that really the best measure, capturing those who are actively seeking work? Perhaps not, because we're going to miss some people who are actively seeking work that aren't applying for benefits. So it's imperfect in that sense. So we'll talk a little bit more about measurement, validity, and reliability in the next video. But at least it gives us something to work with in terms of defining a way to observe or measure those people we're talking about in that defined concept of unemployment. Finally, at least for statistical analyses, we then have to have a fourth level in the operationalization process which is going from our observable indicator down to our quantitative indicator. All right, so let's take another quick look at the operationalization process. So here I have the 4 major stages we'll use for operationalization and statistical analysis laid out on the left. At the top, we have the abstract concept, which is the general or very loose thing or characteristic we're trying to measure about our subjects. Our second step is to create a defined concept, which gives that abstract concept shared meaning for the reader and the audience. Our third phase, or our third step, is to determine or identify an observable indicator of that defined concept. And then finally, for statistical analyses, we need to take that observable indicator and turn it into a countable or quantifiable measure. All right, so let's look at a couple of examples. So let's suppose that we want to measure a student's level of college readiness. This would be really important to, 1, let students know if they are prepared to go to college, and 2, for universities and colleges to use as an admission standard to know who's going to be successful. So let's suppose that we define this very vague concept of college readiness as a student's mathematical plus reading plus writing ability. That we think that math skills, reading comprehension skills, and writing skills are essential for college success. How might we observe a student's level of college preparedness based on this defined criteria? Well, one way we can do it is by creating a standardized exam. We may put together an exam full of multiple choice questions geared at testing how well a student is able to demonstrate math proficiency, reading comprehension, and writing proficiency. In many ways, this is really what the SAT exam is all about. The SAT exam is to measure math, writing, and reading skills for students. So we might use that standardized exam as our observable indicator, and then we have to come up with some kind of scheme to turn the responses on that exam into a numeric value, a quantifiable indicator. So here's how the SAT scores turn responses on a multiple choice exam into a quantifiable standardized score for college preparedness. In the blue column, you can see here that this is the raw score. These are the number of correct answers that students provide on the multiple choice questions. And you can see here there's 58 questions for math, there's 52 questions for reading, and 44 questions for writing and language. Each of the raw scores, number correct, has a corresponding section score. So you can see here for, let's say, 5 questions right, that corresponding math score is 260 versus 58 questions right, which has a math score of 800. Similarly, a 5 questions right for reading gives a score of 14 versus 50 questions right, let's say, for reading gives a score of 39. And of course, you can look at the same thing for the writing score. So you can see from the table, though, that there are highly different scoring schemes for the math section, the reading section, and the writing and language test sections. The math section has a total possible score of 800, whereas the scores for the reading and writing sections are much less. So the SATs also have a conversion equation where you can plug in the raw scores for the different sections and then convert those scores to basically even out with the math section. So you can see here that basically there's a combination writing and reading score that then is multiplied by 10 to give that other 800 point max that goes along with the math score for the total of 1600. So basically then we have a possible score ranging from 400 to 600 for all sections of the SAT as the quantifiable indicator of a student's college preparedness. SAT scores are, of course, only one possible measure of college preparedness. We may define the concept of college preparedness differently. We might define it instead as math, reading, and writing ability as personal motivation to succeed. Perhaps the best way to gauge personal motivation is through a written personal statement, which at many institutions is part of a college application packet. Readers could then rate the written personal statement on a 5-point scale ranging from unsatisfactory to excellent to gauge how motivated they think the student is to succeed at college. Yet another opportunity or another possibility for a measure of college preparedness is to look at not just mathematical plus written plus reading comprehension or ability, but look at total academic ability plus some other factors that would contribute to success, like study habits, motivation, interest, passion, and so on. Perhaps the measure we'd want to use there would be expert assessment of a person's total package or total ability to succeed. Maybe we want to look at multiple experts' evaluation of a person's ability to succeed. So our observable measure in this case might be the assessment made by teachers the student has already had, presumably in high school. The quantitative indicator from that would then be an average GPA, or the cumulative GPA of students in high school, based on a 4.0 scale. So the real important point here is that there are a lot of different alternative ways we can quantify or measure the same abstract concept. Whether or not some of these measures are better or worse than others is an important consideration for statistical analyses. Once again, the best data or the best measure or concept we have, the best results we'll have for decision making. And we'll talk about how to identify the better or worse alternatives for different measures of the same concept in the next video on measurement validity and reliability.